Due to the graphic nature of this program, viewer discretion is advised.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for tuning in to today's broadcast. It's the Friday, July 3rd, 2026 episode of the Marco Dre Show, the only show where the facts are facts and hard truths thrive. What better way to begin your Independence Day weekend celebrations than with the history of how our nation was formed? We have to know the history of our founding, and by doing so, we have to look at the who, the what, the why, and the how this nation was formed. Now, I'm going to bring you through a whole series of what the Declaration and that entire process was all about with the American Revolution. I do have some other great articles for us today, ladies and gentlemen, should we have time to get into our economics. I had a great series of articles for you right then and there, so I think you'll enjoy each and every one of them, so please stick around for that entire hour. But as I told you before, we need not only be proud Americans, but we also must raise young Americans. This is how we save the country from the powers that be. And we need to do it now more than ever. On that note, I want to start today's program commemorating our nation's founding as we celebrate our 250th anniversary of America tomorrow, July the 4th, and our independence from the British Empire. Certainly not a small achievement, both defeating Great Britain and surviving this long as a civilization, which makes this semi-quincentennial or the quarter millennial anniversary so important. And by the way, so exciting today to be alive, too, I'd have to say. And I want you to know that you ought to be proud to call yourself an American, not just on Independence Day, not just once a year, but every day. That we are the inheritors, the heirs of something so great that people from all over the world, every walk of life, want to come here. Now, I know you'll see this and hear this from those over the weekend that will go online or go on MS Nobody Cares or CNN or any of those other rogue so-called news organizations and speak ill of the United States. I want you to know that despite these low-grade, low-IQ, trash-talking, ungrateful hypocrites with their ad hominem attacks on America, that we are proud to be Americans. We, those of you that listen to my show, and others like my show as well, that share the same sentiments, that love this nation, are proud to be Americans. Never have any type of setback to that. Don't be afraid to show people that you care about this country. This is our day to honor our founding. Honor the men that created our country. And honestly, if you don't like it, you can get the hell out of the country. That's what I have to say about that. I'm sick of this now. I'm sick of hearing things like this from people that are so ungrateful. Ungrateful that we have inherited this great country. And all they can do is speak ill of it. We all have our family stories too, by the way. How we got here one way or another. My family came here in the late 19th century, early 20th century from Italy through Ellis Island. And I've told you this before. We always should know our roots. But you also need to know what you are. You're an American. You're an American first. There's no greater gift than that. It doesn't matter where you're from, what religion you practice, or your race, or what sex you are. If you want to become an American, you can be, and you will be all the better for it. Now, in the 250 years of this nation, we've grown to become the greatest civilization that our world has ever seen. It's undisputable, and likely that we'll ever see, by the way. Again, thanks to our founding fathers and the government that they gave us, whose names will always forever be synonymous with freedom, with liberty, self-autonomy, whose vision to create this nation under God will be remembered for so long as there is life on this planet. I do believe that. The 56 men that signed their names in rebellion to King George's tyrannical authoritarianism meant life or death for them. Meant going up against the strongest empire the world had ever seen. The strongest army, the strongest navy. There's nothing short of a gamble for all these men that did this. This took some courage. Now, again, if this war was lost by the colonists, they would surely have been hung for treason. No doubt about that. However, instead of that happening, as fate would have it, they became the heirs to this great nation, and they developed the foundation of which we still use today. That's how really groundbreaking all of it was. These were brilliant men. These were honorable men. And they had finally had enough with the crown controlling every single aspect of their lives from 3,000 miles away. Thomas Jefferson writes in the Declaration of Independence, he lists this long list of grievances that he and his fellow colonists had with the king. And one of them, I'll read this just to you, says, for imposing taxes on us without our consent. Again, in other words, no taxation without representation, which is very important, as you will see shortly. But there were also many other grievances as well, and there were also many other major problems brewing up inside of the colonies. Britain didn't allow them to manufacture on their own or set up their own type of mercantilist system in the country. And this was, it wasn't a country, but in the colonies. But this was done to control the commerce. And this was a way to keep them kind of contained, if you will. Keep the wealth flowing one way and not the other way. So the colonies would gather raw materials, they would send them back to Britain, and then Britain would then develop them, manufacture them, and then they would send the finished goods back to the colonies as imports. Now, a part of doing that, they also limited their exporting power on enumerated goods such as tobacco, sugar, cotton, wool, indigo, ginger. They later banned certain types of manufacturing. They even banned things like foundries, which are used for metal casting. They would prevent the type of manufacturing of woolen goods, hats, iron productions, wool, yarn, drapery, other specialized textiles, again through legislation of the Parliament, not within the colonies. Taxation on sugar, taxation on stamps in the 1760s. In other words, they had no say in their own future, and they had no say in really their own governance. And this is why they wanted to be freed of that, because they had a ruler and not a true leader. Now, this tyranny came to a head on December the 16th, 1773, several years before our Declaration was signed, in Boston, Massachusetts, which is at the time really becoming this hotbed for radicalism after decades of this sort of abuse. And I know that sounds odd hearing this, since Massachusetts today is really just a leftist enclave that most, certainly the politicians of that state, reject our founding, and of whom I would have to say our founders would likely themselves throw these alleged politicians who spit on our country, who spit on the Constitution, into the Boston Harbor. Can you imagine that? Wouldn't that be a sight? I'd love to see that, by the way. But at the time, a group of colonists called the Sons of Liberty, they decided they'd had enough with the Tea Act. This was a tax of 3 shillings per pound of tea on the colonists, and these Sons of Liberty, led by Samuel Adams, boarded a British merchant ship, and they decided to throw all 342 chests of this tea into the Boston Harbor. It was later called the Boston Tea Party. And what a party it was. A complete act of defiance against the king. So much so that the British Parliament acted right away and ended Massachusetts' governance and closed the Boston Harbor down itself. So this is just the start of so many issues between the colonists and the British soldiers. The magistrates within the colonies continued, and we saw things like public acts of humiliation, like tar and feathering. There were certain levels of violence that would break out. But it was this spark. It was this that gave the colonists, over the next several years, the will to believe that they could challenge Britain and they could actually govern themselves. Afterward, they began sending petitions and pleas to the king, of course, and to Britain about reform inside the colonies, but to no use, of course. Their pleas were not heard. So again, they did try the civil way, the diplomatic way. They tried to reason with the king, and he would have none of it. But now these visionaries, this is what I call them at this point, these are visionaries. These are people that see something great coming from this revolution that would soon happen. And they decided to meet in Philadelphia to create what is called the First Continental Congress on September the 5th, 1774. This is where they discussed to one another their difficulties with the king, their, I guess you'd say, their ill will towards the king. And in these sessions, men would actually get up and tell stories about where they were from. And at one point, John Adams of Massachusetts Bay, yes, our second president, or soon-to-be second president, got up and he orated a story about a pastor from the pulpit referring to King George as a Egyptian pharaoh. And I thought to myself, this is so remarkable for several reasons. These men, these pastors, these ministers, these priests in the pulpits, in the colonies, preaching to their congregations, were monumental in so many different ways because they were advocating for freedom and independence from a tyrannical Great Britain. This was part of the seeds that were planted that would give birth to this American Revolution later. And this was huge because many people at that time obviously attended church services, and at that time, they would be subject to being hearing these types of lectures quite often. So this is all a foundation being built. Now, sadly, we don't have this anymore in America, ladies and gentlemen. I'm sorry to tell you this. We just don't have it. Where our pastors, our ministers, our priests would speak out against this type of level of tyranny or the societal norms of which we find ourselves experiencing today because they're afraid of losing their 501c3 status due to the Johnson Amendment. Yes, the then Senator Lyndon Baines Johnson. But you can't talk politics or current events anymore. Otherwise, you might lose your tax exemption. You get the slip, and then, of course, unless it benefits the left, of course. But, if you're speaking about America, American values, conservatism, forget it. You'll simply cease to have that. That's why all that was set up. But I want you to think about this, though. These stories being told amongst these men relished in the fact that people in all 13 colonies were likewise fed up with Great Britain. Now, again, it was difficult to get around, obviously, in 1774. It was like you got on a plane from Atlanta and, made it into Philadelphia. You had to travel far and long to get to these locations. It was, horseback, walking, God knows what else. But it would take you a long time. So the fact that everyone from these 13 colonies convened in what was called the First Continental Congress was very, very interesting because they all got to share their own experiences from the different colonies of which they were from. But they actually saw that despite of where they were, they all shared that same vitriol for the king. And by the way, they would even send letters back to one another. After leaving, they would communicate with each other. But they also would write back to the people back at home to share what was going on. And John Adams, who, as you can see, besides being a lawyer, he was a prominent figure in our founding, ladies and gentlemen. And it made such an impression on him that he wrote to his wife Abigail, and he said to her, "The business of Congress is tedious beyond expression. Every man in it is a great man, an orator, a critic, a statesman. The consequence of this is that business is drawn and spread out to an immeasurable length. This is also parts of those seeds that we were just talking about in the congregations of these churches. Now it's coming together in this committee, if you will, this Congress, this quorum. These seeds are being planted for a vision of a new country right there in Philadelphia." And as tensions continued to escalate, diplomacy and negotiations beginning to fail more and more, and the American Revolution reaching its inception point, a really powder keg moment, if you will, on April the 19th, 1775, when British troops made their way to Concord to round up colonial military supplies, thanks to Paul Revere and others, warning that the British are coming. You've all heard that phrase before. The local militias then intercepted some of these 700 British soldiers at Lexington with 77 Minutemen. Now, getting their name, of course, because they can assemble really at a minute's notice. That's why they got the name Minutemen. And this encounter caused the two to fire upon one another. There were casualties that came from both sides about this. The shot heard around the world. That was the starting point of the American Revolutionary War. And a revolution was born, and that was the American Revolution, folks. Now you know also why we have a Second Amendment and the right to bear arms and to form a militia in case there is ever a tyrannical government. That is exactly why. Everything in our Constitution reflects what Great Britain was doing to the colonies, and they said no more. We are not going to have this. We are going to be free men. Now, other later battles soon ensued, Bunker Hill being one of the first major battles early on, Fort Ticonderoga, Monmouth after Washington's winter in Valley Forge, Quebec, Long Island, Trenton, Princeton, Saratoga, and among others, and the culmination, of course, being the siege at Yorktown in 1781. But the unifying moment came in July 1st of 1776. This is when the Continental Congress, the Second Continental Congress, met after much debate and deliberation to vote on what was called the Lee Resolution. Now, this was drafted by a gentleman named Richard Henry Lee of Virginia. And basically, it states the obvious, that all the British colonies were free and independent states. They were not colonies, but they were states. And they rejected any type of allegiance they had with the British Crown. Now, this was not a benign moment. This war was well underway. General George Washington was in Manhattan preparing for the Battle of Long Island at the time. And on July 2nd, 1776, the final votes by the delegates sent from each of the colonies to vote on independence was taking place, and this was necessary because if this wasn't unanimous, obviously the future of being free, or a free state surrounded by a British territory, would leave really a very uncertain future for these colonies, declaring, of course, their statehood. But there were so many remarkable people in this entire story here. The story of, for instance, Caesar Rodney of Delaware may be the most crucial, as he was called back to Philadelphia, riding overnight. He was older, he was sickly. He rode in a storm too, by the way, making it there on the 2nd to cast his vote, cast the aye vote for Delaware, because at that point they had sent 3 delegates, and the 2 delegates that were at the Continental Congress were split. And so he was that deciding vote to allow Delaware to say, yes, we declare our independence of Britain. So John Adams himself, again, going back to John Adams, he said that this day will be remembered as a decisive moment because now it was official. 12 of the 13 colonies came together and voted yes. We are free from the British Empire. We are free of the yoke of King George. And we are now independent states, and we will govern ourselves. And now it's also important to let you all know that every other colonial legislative body were told to vote for independence in Philadelphia. Now, while some were hesitant to cast their vote for independence because, again, they would have been seen as traitors to Great Britain. Now, apart from New York's Congress, which was politically divided, and like Delaware's state Congress, they didn't give them instructions on how to vote. Every other of the 11 remaining colonies, their state bodies said, yes, vote for independence. So this is the kind of the precipice of the start of all this. Now, it wouldn't be until July 9th, 1776, that the delegates from New York would cast their aye votes with the majority to ascertain that, yes, all 13 colonies have voted unanimously for independence. There was no holdouts, in other words. Everybody was on the same page. And this unity, this important moment, creates this kind of watershed moment in the revolution itself. And that brings us to July 4th, 1776, the day of which we all celebrate. The Declaration of Independence was formally adopted by the Second Continental Congress. Thomas Jefferson, its framer, who in June of 1776, from the 11th to I believe about the 28th, what he did was he resided in a boarding house in Philadelphia in the immense, humid, warm summer, just spent day after day writing down all the thoughts in his head about independence and about why the colonies were now going to be free from the British Empire. And he addresses it to a candid world. What do you think about it? It wasn't addressed to King George. It wasn't addressed to the British Parliament. It was just addressed to a candid world. It was for everybody to see. Some 200 copies of the Declaration, after it was finalized, were sent out by the Congress's printer, John Dunlap. State capitals, local governments, army and military units, public gatherings, local newspapers, like, for example, the Pennsylvania Evening Post, town halls, but last but not least, it was displayed in Britain through similar publications, British newspapers, pamphlets, public readings, but not sent directly through King George. Now, of course, he would eventually read it himself, and his response would be swift, rejecting the Declaration of Independence outright, reassuring his claims, his dubious claims, I would have to say, of being divinely ordained as the King of Britain, and that these little colonies had no right to challenge his authority. A little bit too much hubris, folks, I think, if you ask me. But that's the history of it all. So the positions were taken, the sides were chosen. But I want you to imagine again, leading the largest, most wealthiest, most powerful empire to date, and reading from an unloyal subject the words of Thomas Jefferson. Let me read a couple of I'll read you the beginning of this, because, again, we need to know exactly what we're talking about here. The unanimous declaration of the 13 United States of America. Jefferson called it the United States of America. When in the course of human events, it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitles them, a decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed, that whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it, and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem likely to affect their safety and happiness. These are the beginning paragraphs of our declaration, ladies and gentlemen. And as brilliant as they are, can you imagine King George reading this complete rejection by colonists, I'm sure of whom he's never heard of, by the way. I mean, it must have just been so outstanding to probably witness his response to all of this. But look at those ideas. He doesn't just say we need a new king. He said this entire system is not working. This entire foundation just doesn't last. It's just not working. There's no freedom here. There's no freedom of choice. There's no freedom of speech. There's no freedom to declare taxation. There's no freedom to reject the king allowing British troops to be stationed in people's homes, their own private property, because you don't have private property. You are just simple servants of the king in this colony of which you find yourself. America is not an experiment or just an idea, as we're often told, which completely downplays our history and, of course, our country, in my own estimation. But it was a group of dissatisfied and disenfranchised British brethren, right? This is the same group of people. One live in Great Britain, the other live in the American colonies. But they were tired of tyranny from a king of which they really had no connection at this point. And with visions of freedom, liberty, self-autonomy, and the pursuits of happiness through Christian values. You'll notice the words God and Creator already mentioned in our founding. This is all true. This is all important. That a free man can govern themselves better than any one king can do. And the evidence for this is staggering when you look at the ingenuities, the resourcefulness, the innovations, the inventions that have been created since our founding due to the freedom of ideas and thought in this nation. When the 56 men of the Continental Congress signed their names and proclaimed independence, they passed on to us something that has rarely ever occurred in history. I'm certainly not aware of any newly founded governments adding more freedoms and less central control for the people. You just simply don't see that. Which really could have been done also, by the way. We could have easily had a King Washington, but instead, the founders decided we should have a President Washington. We should have a republic. The Constitution, which would, of course, later be the great work of James Madison's brilliance, and enshrined our rights as citizens. Again, we have our Declaration, and of course, later on, we have our Constitution. The same group of men committed to these ideals in the Declaration, folks. And they would go in, they would compare Roman law, British common law. They would look at all these different types of governments. They would look at Greece. They would look all over. And they decided, how can we make this the freest? How can we make this a representative republic that we give people the freedom to choose? And they were able to do so. And I hate to keep talking about John Adams to you over and over again, but John Adams was a monumental figure, ladies and gentlemen, in our founding. And again, he's someone that should not ever be seen as taken lightly. But listen to this. This is one of the quotes from John Adams. He says, "Our Constitution was made for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate to the government of any other." Now, of course, he's referring to our Constitution, our governing body, of which we all hold sacred. You know that I follow our Constitution to a T. I don't do things just based on how I feel. We have to follow our Constitution. That is our governing body. And without that, we don't have a government. We don't have a founding. We have nothing. And so that in and of itself is very, very important that we always follow that to a T. And so, ladies and gentlemen, when you are out celebrating Independence Day, July 4th this weekend, with beers or barbecues or beaches or baseball or boating or blowing up fireworks, I want you never to forget these sacrifices, these hardships, and the determination of a small percentage, 3%, of the men inside these British colonies who stood up to King George, the British Army, the British establishment, and the loyalists and the traitors alike, like Benedict Arnold, who sought to undermine them, many of whom lost their lives. But the ones that did survive would go on to give us the government and ways of life that we have today. Despite our flaws, despite our need to improve our country and our political system, we still live in the freest nation on earth. And may it live another 250 years for our children, for our grandchildren, and their children, and so on, to always enjoy, because our freedoms, of which we enjoy, did not come free. Happy Independence Day, everybody. And on that note, I do want to say to you, I know that was a short clip of our founding, of course, but this is all necessary to know, folks, because, again, if you don't know the founding, if you've never read the Declaration, if you don't understand the Constitution or what these men were dealing with at the time, we're always destined to repeat these big errors in life, unfortunately. Folks, I did want to move on to some other very important articles before we hit our weekend. Let's go over some economic issues, ladies and gentlemen. This comes from CNBC. And unfortunately, the U.S. economy saw job creation cooling sharply heading into the summer months, is what the Bureau of Labor Statistics reported on Thursday. It appears that we just added a small 57,000 jobs for the month of June. Certainly much slower than the downward revised 129,000 added in May, and much worse than the 115,000 Dow Jones consensus forecast, of which they expected to have for the month of June. The unemployment rate did drop to 4.2%, slightly ahead of the 4.1% where it was a year ago. And I just want to say it's important to understand that it was at 4% when President Trump did take office, just again, so we know that. But here's the big kicker with this. I've often told you on this program, yes, it's nice to look at a low unemployment rate. We always want a low unemployment rate, but the unemployment rate only looks at the people that are unemployed, that are looking for a job. It's not indicating the people that can work that are simply not working. And that's why this next statistic is troublesome. The move lower was largely due to a slump in the labor force participation rate. These are people that can work that are not working. This is the number we want to see in the high 60s, not in the low 60s. It should always be between 63 and 67%, generally speaking. But it dropped some 0.3 percentage points to 61.5%, the lowest since May of 2021. What was happening in May of 2021? Oh, that's right. Joe Biden came into office, continuing to shut down the economy. Oh, yeah. So, again, we've got to increase these numbers. We've got to increase employment. The government needs to expand. our economy, not their own powers. What we saw also were household employment numbers plummeting during this month, with 507,000 fewer people reporting at work. A broader unemployment measure that includes discouraged workers and those, of course, holding some part-time jobs for economic reasons also declined by 0.2 percentage points to 7.9%. And on other terms, where do we get these jobs? Where do these jobs come from? Well, we had professional and business services contributing the most. We had 36,000 jobs created in this category. Social assistance sector added some 25,000 jobs, and healthcare employment rose by 22,000, a much slower than normal pace for this industry. And government added 8,000 jobs. I thought we were draining the swamp. Why are we getting more jobs now? We saw leisure and hospitality, though, reporting the loss of 61,000 jobs. This one's a big hit right now, especially for the slower than usual seasonal hiring that we're seeing. Many people speculated, too, that the World Cup might provide some sort of boost to the payrolls of this sector. But unfortunately, that slowed more than they expected it to. And so, folks, not a good report number, certainly. Unemployment is pretty much stagnant as where it needs to be. But we need to raise the labor force participation rate. That's the big takeaway with us. We're not doing that. So my question to you, we're talking about investments. We're talking about things like the economy's booming. We keep hearing this. I was listening to Fox the other day. Someone was on, I forget who it was. The economy's booming. Don't you know? Look at the stock market. And I've said to myself, there is a difference between Wall Street and Main Street. There is a difference between the top marginal stocks and what you in rural California take home. That's just the truth of it. We need to get our cities growing. Right now we have roughly 20% of our downtowns that have empty buildings in them, which is likely to lead to a banking bust. We have an AI bubble now that's booming out of control right now. We have to look at what's going on around us. Where is the growth in this economy? If the economy was growing at the rate that they tend to tell us, we would see these job report numbers significantly much higher right now. And again, I always go back to Reagan. Because again, when I first voted for Trump, I thought of him like a Reagan figure. He wasn't really from the establishment. He was speaking out. He was trying different things. A very good orator, Reagan was. But he created 20 million jobs in 8 years. We're not doing that now. We need that now more than ever. We need to start growing this economy again. We have extremely high trade deficits right now. We have a very high national debt, almost $40 trillion in debt. And there's no sign that any of this is going to start coming down at any time right now. Which brings me to my next point too, by the way, unfortunately speaking. This comes from Quartz. And it says Federal Reserve Chair Kevin Warsh stepped into his new job with a case for lower interest rates on the back of an AI-fueled productivity boom. Remember, I told you this is a bubble right now. It's just getting bigger and bigger. What he got instead was a $700 billion AI spending blitz that's demolishing his argument for rate cuts anytime soon, with more price increases about to ripple through the U.S. economy. Yeah, look at inflation right now, 4.2%. We're looking at core inflation. What you pay for is now at 4%. Again, that's excluding energy and food prices, which is so convenient, isn't it? But I told you before, I said to you that yes, as inflation goes up, you're going to have to see the interest rates again follow suit. Because again, if you want to try to reduce inflation, you have to make it more difficult for people to borrow money. Now, Trump wants people to borrow money. That's why he wants the interest rates to drop. That's what he did in his first term, because he wanted to make it more easily available to people for them to borrow money. And more money circulating around, the economy tends to do better. However, when you're getting inflation that is over 4%, the only reasonable solution to this is to have interest rates at 1% higher. So in other words, if you have 4.2% inflation, you've got to have 5.2% interest rates. And if we go above 5%, that's going to be very detrimental to our overall economy. Certainly the way it's set up right now. So Kevin Warsh is in kind of this AI doomer situation right now. I believe he will have to raise rates soon. I know at the last meeting, he decided to vote against it and let things stay as is. But he's got to make a decision soon because very shortly, probably the next couple weeks, our strategic petroleum reserves are no more. We will not be able to pull from them anymore. We're not getting any more imports of heavy crude coming into the country. Certainly not any significant value. And what happens as a result of that? Diesel fuel, jet fuel, we have no way to produce this. So we have to make a decision. Are we going to produce diesel fuel for our shipping in this country? Or are we going to have jet fuel so we can fly our planes? Which one is it going to be? And the other one will struggle significantly at the result of the other. Because you can't make both at the same time. They're two different types of fuels. And no one's talking about this. I've been saying this for a couple of weeks now. We're depleting our reserves because of this war in Iran. I don't just say that because I don't want the war, but this is the reality. This is the economic reality of this. And if the bottom falls out in the energy sector, prices are going to continue to rise. If it costs more to get goods to where they need to go, that's going to cause prices, retail prices, store prices, everything's going to rise as a result of that. And once the supply from the oil goes wayside, then you're looking at even higher gas prices and energy prices. There's no other way to say this to you folks, but it's coming. It's coming soon. And again, that goes for diesel. Obviously, hopefully the unleaded and the medium and premium prices would be cheaper because, again, it's a different type of crude oil. But if we can't get goods to where they need to go, or if we totally just shrink that supply, simple supply and demand tells us, folks, when you cut off that supply and have the same exact demand, you're going to have higher prices. So my estimation, by mid-July, I think we're going to have this issue with producing diesel and jet fuel. And either you're not going to take a vacation this summer, or you're not going to be able to buy food at the grocery store. One or the other. I don't know which one it's going to be. I don't think anyone wants to starve to death. Just thought I would share that with you. And on that note, folks, let's move on because, again, we're a little bit short on time right now. I want to move on to our stock market numbers. So let's take a quick look at what's going on. This comes from CNBC. The Dow Jones is trading today at $52,900.07 a share, in the green at 1.14% today. S&P 500 trading at $7,483.24, completely flat at 0.00%. And finally, the NASDAQ trading at $25,832.67 a share, down 0.8%. And again, a lot of this has to do with the fact that people are bullish on tech. A lot of the tech stocks. That's really where this all comes from. And when you have a government that's bullish in this, the tech stocks tend to get higher, and these marginal stocks tend to look a lot better. People get excited about it. Hey, the Dow Jones has never been this high. Well, again, that's great. But what else are we producing? What else are we doing besides these tech stocks? What else is there? So we're seeing the strengths in the technology, the semiconductors, the industrial benefiting from, again, the geopolitical stability that we seem to have at the moment. And, of course, the AI-driven growth sectors. That's where this is all coming from. But it's cautious optimism. Because if we're not doing anything with this, if we're not developing, we're just simply getting investments and nothing's coming from it. And again, it's going to be very difficult for these semiconductors to be built because you don't have the helium that's necessary to produce them. Where does 44% of the global helium supply come from? It comes out of the Persian Gulf, which is right now closed for business, certainly coming to America. So I worry about this, folks. I worry about the consumer discretionary, the communication sectors. Again, they right now seem to be sensitive to interest rate hikes because, again, if those interest rates go up, again, you're going to see, I think the value of the dollar go down. You'll see gold go up. But it's going to be harder for people to borrow money. And that's going to be problematic all around. All right, let's move on. Let's go to Bitcoin right now, our cryptocurrency, trading at $62,177.91, up almost a percentage point today. We'll look at Amazon as well. Amazon is trading at $242.67 today, up 0.40%. And then let's look at the NASDAQ. Let's see where we are. Trading at $194.83, down just a little bit at 1.39% today, so not doing terribly well. Advanced Micro Devices trading at $517.82, down 4.26% today. Yeah, you're seeing a lot of these in the red today, folks. Microsoft trading at $390.49 a share, up 1.62%. And Meta. How's Meta doing? Oh, not too good today. Down 4.9% today, trading at $582.90 a share. Alphabet Google, well, you guessed it, going down barely at 0.36% today, trading at $559.91 a share. Dell Technologies, also in the red today, down significantly at 7.27% today, trading at $394.32 a share. Micron Technologies is trading at $975.56 a share, down 5.49%. And then we got Broadcom, also in the red, almost down 9 points today, trading at $360.45 a share. And finally, looking at Tesla, good old Elon Musk, down 7.49% today, trading at $393.45 a share. Well, again, what have I told you? Right now, people are bullish. People are investing. But again, if we're not producing, if there is uncertainty, especially in the interest rates, you're going to see these tech stocks, again, beginning to move around, a lot more volatility, and that's what's going to push the top marginal futures around as well. Let's move on to our precious metals. We've got gold now trading at $4,187.30 a share, up 1.49% today. Silver trading at $62.81 a share, up 2.87%. We've got platinum trading at $1,651.90, up 1.46%. And palladium unchanged at $1,272.50 a share right now. So what we're seeing right now with the precious metals, certainly all of them are trading higher today. They're obviously being driven by the safe haven buying that's taking place. The demand for gold and silver especially has been supported by investor buying and really amid the uncertainty about the markets right now. We're also getting reports of strong purchases from family offices and the central banks about both precious metals, so that's why you're seeing that. The weaker than expected U.S. job reports has also eased concerns about the immediate and imminent interest rate hikes right now, boosting the safe haven flows into gold, certainly not the dollar. And again, we have softer economic data right now, so again, the steady industrial demand also lets gold be the winner for this week. And finally, folks, let's move into oil. Let's see how we're doing. Again, coming from CNBC, we have West Texas Intermediate trading at $68.78 a barrel right now, up 0.13%. Brent crude down significantly, but still in the green, trading at $71.94 a barrel, up 0.19%. Let's see how we're doing over in the Persian Gulf. Right now we have Murbain crude trading at $76.03 per barrel. We have Dubai crude trading at $74.83 a barrel. Western Canadian Select trading at $57.99 per barrel. And Urals crude is trading out of Russia at $56.19 per barrel, roughly down 4.67% from the previous day. Now, again, why is this happening? What's happening with the oil? We see the price of oil going down. People are excited about this. They think, hey, finally everything's good with the war. Trump was right. The prices are going to come crashing down. But why are we not seeing the price of the pump? For all the reasons I just told you. Yes, we produce lots of regular crude oil right here in the United States. However, our commerce, our economy runs on tractor trailers. That's the problem. And if you don't have the diesel to run these trucks, or if it costs significantly more, all the other prices are going to go up. That's just, again, economics 101, folks. So while we're getting that the U.S.-Iran peace efforts are underway, again, the bottom from that could fall at any moment. We're still seeing market sentiment. The slight gains reflects the cautious optimism right now, again, because, again, when at any moment we could say we're back on with this war, or Iran's attacking Israel, or Israel's attacking in Lebanon, and everything can again spiral out of control. The talks can go wayside, and the ships may not move through the strait, folks. We're seeing, too, from marinetraffic.com that seldom any other ships besides Iranian ships and possibly some Chinese ships, Indian ships, you're not seeing much movement coming out of the Persian Gulf. So while people hear, oh, the Persian Gulf is open for business, no toll for 60 days, anyone can cross over, but we're not seeing the ships go through, most people, especially on Wall Street, are not paying attention to this. They just hear the good news and run with it. Oh, everything's going to be fine with the oil markets. But that's not necessarily true. And no one is paying attention, as I told you before, to the heavy crude depletion that we have in our oil reserves and the consequences that will result because of that very, very soon. And by the way, I'm told mid-July, we're probably going to be hitting that full depletion when we don't have any more to develop on our own. And then what are we going to do next? Rely on Venezuela? Rely on Russia? Rely on the Persian Gulf? Nothing is coming from the Persian Gulf to the U.S. And we need that to happen very, very soon. And anything that comes from the Persian Gulf will take at least 2 months to get where it needs to go in the United States. So I'm very, very worried about this. I'm worried about the cost of goods going up and the ramifications that come as a result of this. And folks, that will do it for our economic report for this week. So I hope you're in the loop now that, yes, the economy is stagnant right now. Inflation is up. Job reports are not as strong as we'd expect. And the consumer sentiment is in the tanks, as always. So Trump has got a lot of work cut out ahead of him, especially in this midterm cycle. He's got to turn the economy around. If he chooses not to, if he doesn't do anything, then we are in lots of trouble. Certainly allowing the Democrats to take the House again. Before when I spoke to you during my opening monologue about Independence Day, we were talking about our founding. And one of the things I mentioned to you is raising young Americans. There's no truer statement than that. You have to raise young Americans that respect the Constitution, that respect the founding, that respect the Declaration, respect our way of life. So that means, yes, while anybody can come here, that does not mean you come to this country and try to completely subject it to the way of which you came from. You are coming into a Christian-based nation. You are coming into a free market capitalist nation. There is no socialism, or certainly there shouldn't be, although we find ourselves in a mini-socialist system already, again, thanks to LBJ and FDR, among others. Other people that exploit that, by the way. But we're seeing, especially this week, from the disastrous Supreme Court justices, with their 5-4 ruling this week, striking down President Trump's executive order, leaving way, I guess, for anybody that wants to, could come across the southern border, have a child, and that child is allegedly an American citizen, even though the text in the 14th Amendment says nothing of the sort. As I've said to you earlier this week, you can go back to my shows on Monday and Tuesday and listen to that. I break it down for you. Again, using the Constitution, certainly not the conceptualism of which some of our justices seem to be working with. But this comes out of the Gateway Pundit. It says, Acting Attorney General Todd Blanche announces on Wednesday that the DOJ will now prioritize prosecutions of birth tourism and the schemes that go along with it involving visa fraud as foreign nationals continue to exploit U.S. citizenship loopholes. Yeah. Well, he's absolutely right about that. I can't say much more about that other than he's right. This is what people are doing because what they're doing is working the system. They understand that if the U.S. government is this stupid to say that, yes, my child's a citizen, but I'm not, that this makes sense, and they try to use some ridiculous 1898 ruling that a Chinese child was born to illegal aliens and the court found that he was a citizen. Well, I'm sorry, folks. They're wrong. They're wrong for the reasons I told you of what the 14th Amendment says. It doesn't say anybody can just be born here. I said to you earlier in the week. all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof. Therefore, if you're not of the jurisdiction of the United States, aka your parents, or at least one of your parents, that's the way they look at it now, you are not a U.S. citizen. So if your mother were to come across the southern border, give birth to you, and she's of legal status, you are not a U.S. citizen. You are a citizen of the state or the nation of which she resides. Or both your parents, doesn't matter which it is. But for some reason, John Roberts, Amy Bonehead Barrett, the three liberal ladies who, I don't know, their jurisprudence escapes me. But they believe that that means for everybody. Just be born on American soil, you're a citizen. So what's Todd Blanche's opinion on how to solve this? Let's take a listen to clip one.
From a Department of Justice standpoint, it's obviously focusing our prosecutors and our law enforcement partners on birthing tourism, and it's a booming industry, and it will continue. It will continue given the Supreme Court's decision yesterday. There's other things that DHS can do and the federal government can do in the visa process and the application process to try to minimize or limit the opportunity of folks coming here to not to visit and not to do what they're saying they're doing on their tourist visa, but just to have a baby that can then be a U.S. citizen. So from our standpoint, it's focusing on what is a problem. So everybody should agree that it's a violation of our laws if your intent in coming here, if you're pregnant, is to have a child to become a United States citizen because of our now laws. And so what we have to do as the Department of Justice is make sure our agents or HSI agents that we work with and the FBI are focused on stopping that, and that's what we're going to do.
What needs to be done? I'll be very blunt about this. What needs to be done, what has to be done, if Trump wants to save this nation over this ridiculous ruling by the Supreme Court, he can and he has within his power, this is constitutional, he could prevent people coming into this country legally or illegally from any country in which he desires. Now, I personally think he should put a moratorium on immigration the rest of his term and say we're not bringing any more new immigrants to this country. Just say we're not having any more. Apply later. Thank you so much. We're not bringing anybody new to this country. And anybody that comes here for tourist reasons, they need to be checked to make sure, of course, how long the duration is going to be of which they stay here. And if you see a mother coming off a plane and she's, 9 months pregnant, she's not coming to the United States. So we've got to do a major crackdown on all this. Because what the Supreme Court did this week is treasonous. Very treasonous, by the way. This is almost like Benedict Arnold level treason. Just stabbing their country in the back to open the floodgates to the entire world. And normally I don't like when Trump puts out these Truth Social posts. But he was absolutely right the other day when he said, congratulations to China. Because he understands exactly what is at stake here. I told you, when Trump is on, he's on. When he's off, he's off. There's no in between. But he's absolutely right about the Chinese nationals, these other nationals that come to this country. They have a child, they get the documentation, they go back to where they're from, and then that child can come back and come and go whenever they please? When they have zero ties to the country? No, what should happen is the southern border, the northern border, are closed indefinitely right now, with the exception of coming to travel. You're not staying, though. And we're going to put a moratorium on immigration. That's first and foremost. But also, we have to get rid of the existing illegal aliens in the country and the expired visa holders, which, again, I've been told exceeds roughly about 100 million people. Now, some people will argue with me and say, Jerace, you're overdoing it. I had someone tell me the other day that there was, I think, 18.6 million illegals. I said, really? 18.6, can you explain that? Oh, yeah, well, and they have no really answer. They just hear the number and they go with it. I go, let's say at the bare minimum, Joe Biden brought in 12 million illegal aliens in this country. The number is probably much higher, probably more likely 20 million. Are you honestly telling me there was only 6 million illegals residing in this country when Joe Biden allowed the floodgates to be opened up? You're telling me there's 6 million illegals in this country at the time we've had during Bill Clinton's administration, he deported 11 million of them. Really? There's only 6.5, maybe? The math isn't mathing, folks, and the common sense is null and void. The real numbers indicate around 2020, 2021, Yale did a study, and they found that it wasn't the 11 million we continue to hear time and time again. The real numbers were around 22 to probably 25 million illegal aliens. Now, if we do basic common math, we see, okay, 25 plus the likely 20 that Joe Biden brought in, plus the expired visa holders, which estimates to be around 50 to 55 million. Yeah, you heard that right. That would put us over 100 million illegal aliens. That is almost a third of the population. Has no right to be in this country. So Donald Trump has DHS at his hands. He's got Mark Wayne Mullen in there. He's got the go-ahead for the temporary protected status of, protected status of the Haitians, Syrians, and anyone else that came in under those edicts. And he's able to go and send them back to where they came from. But then we have the DHS coming out saying, well, they can apply now for permanent status. No, they cannot. They need to go back home. And any other group of people that came in here illegally, they need to go back home as well. A nation cannot survive this. A nation will not survive this. As we celebrate 250 years, we have to be aware of this. A nation is not going to survive this. Immigration has got to be under control. We cannot allow illegal aliens to just enter the country, have children, and say, well, they're all citizens now. I mean, imagine that, too. Imagine how many people have gotten citizenship from parents that were illegal aliens over this ridiculous reading of the 14th Amendment, which never, ever allowed what they're saying it has done. And now, folks, while my blood pressure is skyrocketing, of course, I hope Todd Blanche will allow DHS to, again, process these people. I hope Trump will get DHS to work, ICE to work, and we need to kick up those numbers. We are not saying mass deportation. We're saying nothing. It is a fraction of what needs to be done. Every single state needs to get on board with this, and the people that do not belong here need to go back home. That's the way you save a country. Does Donald Trump want to save the country? Does he want to pretend that he's saving a country? This would be something that would be legacy-worthy. Donald Trump saves the country from the illegal alien hordes that come to rob, steal, and pillage. And I'm not saying everyone that's here illegally is a horrible person. Don't misunderstand me. I actually know people that are illegal aliens, by the way. Fine people. I like them. I get along with them. I'm not saying everyone is bad. I'm not saying everyone comes here to leech off the system. Many of them do. When you have a third of the people in federal prison are illegal aliens there for drug dealing, you got a problem on your hands, though. And so I've always said, yes, everyone needs to go back, but the people that have no criminal record aside from coming in illegally, they do need to pay their way to get back in. They should be the ones that enter quickly. They need to go through the proper channels and do it the right way. Nothing should just be granted to people simply because. And if you have a system set up like that, I'm sure they could do that too. I'm sure 100% they could do this so quickly. We have all these tech giants in this country. I'm sure we could easily indicate where these people are, send them back to their country of origin, let the people that work, speak the language, have no criminal record, that actually like living in the country, come back into the country quickly. We could do that today. And if Eisenhower could deport over 1 million illegal aliens in 1954, I think we should have much better numbers than that, folks. If Bill Clinton could do that in the 90s, we should definitely have that as well. And by the way, this is funny. This comes from The Guardian. I'll finish today's program with this. They're outraged. They're outraged with Ron DeSantis over the cruel Florida move to ban undocumented students from college. This is another step in the right direction. When you have a state government that says, we're not going to allow you to come into our universities, you're not going to take a seat that does not belong to you because you cut in front of the line and you think everybody owes you. Anyone that is illegally here, and by the way, this was passed by the Florida Board of Education on Tuesday, to bar access to its 28 state-funded institutions to anybody not a U.S. citizen or lawfully present in the country. Now, again, this is how the states can utilize this. They could say, hey, and if you're coming to Florida, you're not going to get here. You're not going to come into college. You're not going to get free public education. That should be the next step, too, by the way. You're not going to utilize these services if you're here illegally. That would be a step in the right direction if we had people that would go ahead and do these things. And I don't know why Ron DeSantis is one of the only people that's on board with this. This is the way you allow people to understand you're not going to get a free ride. You're not coming into this country. I don't care if you're a dreamer or not. You don't belong here. I'm sorry to say that. If you want to come here legally, do it legally. You don't get to cut in line. And rewarding people for doing so is the complete wrong move. Sorry to say. That's all the time I have for you, folks. Thank you again for being here, as always. Make sure you're always staying prepped with food, water, medicine, fuel, money, tools, anything to be self-sufficient. Enjoy the rest of your day. Have a blessed Independence Day weekend. I'll see you on Monday.